snowing and it's cold. You're gonna have to find a crew, it can't be anyone. They'll have to be there by your side and do what must be done. So go, man, you know that you have it night through day. The pain you feel it to bring it on with the Archie County Band.
Good evening, folks. You are very welcome to Bandido Talks. Folks, the Bandido had to make an appearance this evening. You know, I know we did a show earlier in the week about emergency education. Well, this, you could say, is another form of emergency show. Because, you know, when I was just casually strolling down the street, you know, I found myself a nice little seat. It was sunny today, 24 degrees Celsius. Marvellous stuff. I'm gonna sweat like fuck throughout this show. It's toasty in here, but you'll never hear me complain. I do love the heat, the sunshine, the good weather. But I'm down the street. I find myself a little seat. I don't normally bring my phone out and about with me. I normally leave it in the house, but I had the phone out with me because I had to send off some voice notes to people. And in order to send off the voice notes to certain people on WhatsApp, I had to put the internet on, the 4G. So when I put the 4G on, I just very quickly see this story fly up on my notifications about the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. You know our mate Anthony? Well, you see, Anthony, a few days ago, got himself into the proverbial pickle, the political pickle, we're going to call it. And you know, folks, isn't it remarkable, really? Remarkable. You know, we're going to explain, we're going to dive into what has happened to our mate Anthony, the Prime Minister of Australia. You know, I hear people will say, well, you know, the politicians, they aren't men or women of the people, they're elites of the world, there's nothing relatable. You know, there's no common ground between us and the politicians. They place themselves up here, we are down here as the peon masses. They look down their noses at us. Nothing in common, nothing relatable to these politicians. And then Anthony Albanese delivers to all of us peons, arguably, one of the most relatable statements of the year. You know, we're halfway through, folks, 2026. And I'm going to argue that Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, has given us all on a glorious silver platter the statement of the year. I mean, what happened, folks? I'm stringing this out a little. You know, maybe some of you are familiar with what has actually happened. We're going to read a little BBC article about this, just in a few minutes. But the nuts and bolts of what has happened is Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, went on to a podcast very recently with a comedian. I can't remember her name. It's going to come up in the article. But he goes on to this podcast with this comedian, this female comedian. And, you know, she's got a loose tongue. She's got a, you know, particular sense of humour with sexual undertones, of course. And so towards the end of the podcast, this podcast host has a few quick-fire questions, we could say. You know, a few quick-fire questions. And one of these questions was, I should say, she asks Anthony Albanese, you know, would he date, marry and shag Kylie Minogue? Now, initially, it seems like poor old Anthony, you know, he can feel that this is a loaded question in many ways. You know, he knows that he's going to have to choose his words carefully. Now, look, it's a podcast, folks. It's clearly a question with humorous undertones, not to be taken too seriously by the entire world. But you know, Anthony, he knows that if he doesn't answer this in the right way, everyone's gonna leap on him and tear him to smithereens. So, you know, he sort of tries to evade answering the question. Then she goes again. You know, would you date, marry, and shag Kylie Minogue? And then he gives in to temptation. And he delivers the most relatable statement this year from a politician, I'm going to argue. What is it that he says? You know, he's asked, would he date, marry and shag Kylie Minogue? And what he ends up saying is, yes to all of the above. Kylie's terrific. Who says politicians aren't relatable, folks? I mean, what more could we ask for? Anthony Albanese has just said the exact thing that's in everybody's head. Now look, you saw the thumbnail, folks. When I think of Kylie Minogue, I don't think about the 2026 Kylie Minogue. I think about the younger Kylie Minogue. You know, the one in the thumbnail. Just the younger version of Kylie Minogue. That's what I'm thinking of whenever this podcaster is asking the question. And I would argue that Anthony is thinking the exact same thing. I think Anthony has, he's allowed his imagination to run wild. Initially his political media training says, do not answer the question. Evade the question. Give the podcast host some fluff answer. Blow her off. That's what the media training would say, the political training. All those people that are in the background with Anthony, trying to make sure that his every word is measured to perfection and cannot be misinterpreted. And Anthony tries initially, but then he just gives in to temptation and he becomes extremely relatable to the Bandido because he just says, you know what? Yes to all of the above. I would marry Kylie Minogue, I would date her, and I would indeed shag her because Kylie is terrific. What more could we ask for, folks? I mean, if you live in Australia, what more could you ask from your leader? Marvellous stuff. I mean, I saw the article and I thought I have to go live and talk about this because there's something extremely interesting for us all to learn here from this little story. And of course, as you can imagine, what happened? What tends to happen when a politician actually says something relatable? Because every man, whenever they think of Kylie Minogue, they are thinking of the young version of Kylie Minogue. They're not thinking about this 50, 60-year-old that we see now. No, we're not thinking about that. I'm going to show you the article here. You're going to see a 50, 60-year-old Kylie Minogue. No. Nobody's thinking of that Kylie. Any man who is honest with himself will be thinking of Kylie's younger version. The one that's in the thumbnail, for example. And every man, if they're being honest with themselves, deep down in their mind, they are thinking the exact same thing as Anthony Albanese. Of course, Anthony was just recently married. Not that long ago. And he had to indulge the moment. He had to be relatable. He had to strike up something in common with the regular citizen. And I appreciate that. That's why I'm going to defend Anthony in this show. I'm going to mount a defense of Anthony Albanese because, everyone's thinking it, folks. All the men are thinking it. Now, I know if you were to ask these men in front of their chicks, would they marry, date, or shag the young Kylie Minogue, they would of course deny it because their chick's listening. Of course they'll do that. They'll say, no, I'm really happy with my 2 out of 10. My morbidly obese, flabby 2 out of 10 minger, I'm really happy with her. I wouldn't date, marry or shag Kylie Minogue, but deep down in his head, he is thinking, absolutely, I would date, marry and shag Kylie Minogue. Of course that's what he's thinking. Picture the scene, folks. Picture the scene. We're going to conjure up 2 fictional people here. They don't exist. We're going to take Patsy. I've been using Patsy a lot, folks. I don't know why. We're going to take Patsy. So we've got Patsy and his wife, Michelle. Patsy and Michelle. Now let's imagine. Michelle is a 2 out of 10. And let's say Patsy's a 6 out of 10. He's a little bit above average. Let's say average is 5 out of 10. So Patsy's a 6, Michelle's a 2. You know, back, a number of years ago, before they got married, why do people get married, folks? Why do people do this? But anyway, Patsy decided to get married to Michelle. You know, a few years ago, before they got married, Michelle was in better shape. She was trimmer. She was trying to make sure that come wedding day, she was looking her best for all of the pictures that are going to live on for all of eternity. So, a few years ago, Patsy was a 6 out of 10, and Michelle, let's say Michelle was a 6 out of 10 as well. Let's say they were evenly matched a couple of years ago. But since Michelle got the wedding ring on Patsy's finger, what has happened is Michelle has ballooned out of shape, and now she's an obese, flabby mess and a minger. She's now a 2 out of 10. She has dropped 4 points on the physical attractiveness scale. But because Patsy's married, and because Patsy, being the dipshit that he is, decided to get the law involved in his relationship. Because he decided to do that, nobody forced him to do it, he did it. So Patsy gets the legal system involved in his relationship. He gets married to Michelle. Michelle was a 6 out of 10. Now she's a 2. Because now that she's got the ring on her finger, she knows that she has insurance, basically. She knows that if Patsy's gonna leave her, Patsy's gonna need a divorce. And if Patsy needs a divorce, he's gonna get fleeced in the courts. So what does Patsy do? Yeah, Michelle, she's a minger. That's true. But I'm doing really well with my new business, and it's making lots of money. And, if I divorce Michelle, she's going to get half my estate. Fuck knows what else. Then there's the societal, social, cultural pressure. If I leave Michelle, people are going to look upon me in a disapproving manner. So I'm going to lose status within the community. I'm going to lose a fuck ton of resources as I get dragged through the courts, and Michelle is entitled, thanks to marriage, to half my estate. So what does Patsy do? Patsy thinks, I'll just stay in the relationship. Path of least resistance. I'll conserve more energy doing it this way. Succumbs to his energy conservation mechanism, and he lives out the rest of his miserable existence. But every now and again, throughout his miserable existence with his 2 out of 10 Michelle, something will happen that will bring a little bit of joy into his life. So I want you to picture the scene. We've got Michelle the minger and Patsy the dipshit because he got married to Michelle. He should have known better. Patsy, you should have known better. So let's say they're sitting down on a Friday evening. It's Friday evening, folks. 7:20. Patsy and Michelle, they sit down. Michelle wants to watch Twilight. Because Michelle wants to let her imagination go wild as well. And she wants to imagine that Robert Pattinson's banging her while she watches Twilight. But she doesn't tell Patsy that. But she's having her own little fantasy play out in her own head. So she's all like, Patsy, can we sit down and watch Twilight tonight? Because it's a really good plot. I'm watching the movie because it's a really good plot. And Patsy, he's miserable. He's just thinking, life sucks. I'm stuck with Michelle. She's a minger. Oh, I'm married to her. I'll have to go through the courts to divorce her. Social disapproval, cultural norms, pressure from friends and family. Not worth it. I'll just sit down. and watch Twilight. Path of least resistance. So he sits down. He doesn't want to watch Twilight. He has no fucking interest in it. But Michelle is all up for it. So they sit down on the couch. They get a little bit of popcorn. And they start to watch the movie. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, Patsy gets bored out of his bollocks after 10 minutes. So, he starts to go on his phone. And as he goes on his phone, he comes across the story with Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister. And he reads the story. And you know the way I said, every now and again in Patsy's miserable life, there'll be a wee moment of joy. There'll be a little moment of joy, of happiness, of what could have been in his life. And he indulges his own imagination. And he listens to what Anthony said. When Anthony was asked by this podcast host, would you date, marry, and shag Kylie Minogue? And Anthony just ends up saying yes to all of the above. Kylie's terrific. And in that moment, Patsy is having this glorious image conjured up in his mind of Kylie over here. He's over here. Kylie struts up to him. They can't take their eyes off one another, and he indulges his fantasy. And just as he's getting to the most important part of the fantasy, Michelle turns around and says, well, what are you doing? He snaps out of it. I was watching the scores in the World Cup. Michelle says, what? Let me see your phone. And because Patsy is a fucking dipshit, because he's a dipshit, he gives her his phone. And she says, well, let me see. Whoa, you're scrolling. You're not watching Twilight. And she sees the article. She says, oh, you were reading this article about Anthony Albanese. Ah, he's a sexist pig. Sexist pig. Objectifying women. Degrading them with disgusting sexist comments like that. Isn't it a disgrace, Patsy? And Michelle starts to get really aggressive. Don't you agree, Patsy? It's disgusting. Sexist. Anthony Albanese should be thrown out of his position of power in the government. And Patsy, again, because he's a cock and a dipshit, he says yes. Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Michelle. Very sexist indeed. Despicable. Despicable. And Patsy starts to take Michelle's side. Path of least resistance. And he says, Anthony Albanese is a despicable human. Disgusting. But deep down, in Patsy's mind, he knows that Anthony is speaking the truth. Anthony is probably with some chick at the moment who's not as fancy as Kylie Minogue in her prime. And Anthony indulged himself in the moment on the podcast and said, absolutely, Kylie's terrific. I would shag her. For sure. And Patsy, he does exactly the same thing. He agrees with Michelle. He agrees with his chick and says, yeah, it's just despicable. Sexist. He's a troll. He's an ogre. Anthony Albanese should be thrown out of government. But in his own head, in Patsy's own head, he knows just how relatable the statement was. And he feels this little moment of joy as he indulges his imagination. And he also feels this sense of common ground with the Australian Prime Minister. And he sort of has this renewed hope for politics. Patsy thinks, fuck, it's not often you hear the Prime Minister or President come out with a statement like that. Maybe there's hope yet in the world. There'll be a whole bunch of men, folks, who'll be sitting next to their chick, and they will say Anthony Albanese is an ogre, a disgusting man. But deep down, they know that he's right. Every man would want, would they want to date Kylie Minogue? Well, maybe they would. Would they want to get married to her? Well, maybe. Would they want to shag her? Absolutely. The previous two, marriage, dating, I think most males, most men, if they're being honest, they'd kind of skip those bits. Skip the marriage bit, skip the dating bit. They really just want to get to the last bit. And, sometimes it's necessary, you have to do a bit of the old, the rigmarole that goes on beforehand. You have to engage with it sometimes. Patience is key in this life, folks, oftentimes. But, if men could have it their way, they'd just skip the marriage, they'd skip the dating, and they'd get right to the shagging. And I think that's why Anthony Albanese he speaks to the common man who will deny all of this to his 2 out of 10 flabby, obese, minger girlfriend or wife. He will deny it to her face. As Patsy and Michelle are watching Twilight, he will deny it. He'll say, no. You're the only one for me, Michelle. You're the only one for me. I wouldn't want Kylie, no. Kylie Minogue in her prime, no. I wouldn't want to date her. Marry her? Fuck no. Shag her? Absolutely not. No. You're the one for me. What I want out of this life is a 2 out of 10. Absolutely. That is what, my life's ambition has always been. A 2 out of 10. So look, Anthony, I think, has done a great service to us all. He sort of restores a bit of faith back in the common politician. Do you not think? Coming out with a statement like that? Now, of course, folks, what has happened? Well, you could guess what has happened, of course. There's been backlash. Anthony's had to issue an apology, which I actually thought was funny. We're going to talk about that when we read the article. He had to issue an apology. That's what the media, political training, that's what his advisors would say. Anthony, we know you're right, Anthony. We know you're speaking the truth. All men would say exactly the same thing that you've said. But, just to keep everybody off your back, to keep the heat away from all the things that you are doing at the moment, just issue this, just give a wee apology, Say you unequivocally regret, what you've said. Some garbage like that. But, there's been backlash, folks. Who has the backlash came from? Do you think there are a whole bunch of men disgusted and, up in arms, just voicing their disapproval at what Anthony has said? Do you think it's the men? Do you think the men are just losing their minds over what has been said here by the Australian PM? I'm afraid, folks, there's one gender that's particularly vocal when it comes to their disapproval of what Mr Albanese has said. And it's not the men. Fuck me, folks. When I say gender, all these different genders, it used to be so much simpler. You would say genders, man and woman. Now whenever I say, it's not the men, there could be a whole fuck ton of other genders. But I think you know what I mean. We're going to look at this through a more conventional lens. The two genders. If it's not the men who are complaining and kicking up a fuss over these comments, who do you think? Whose nose has been put out of joint? Well, let's read the article. Let's get a bit more context here, folks. Let's bring it up. Let's go to our mates, the BBC, and see what they have to say. The guiding light in this world, of course. Let's have a look. The BBC, look. Now, there we go. Let's get a look at these two. Now, folks, I don't know about you, but let me zoom in here. Let me zoom in on Anthony. I mean, what are we to make of that face, folks? I mean, how would you describe Anthony's face? The way we always say, don't judge a book by its cover. He definitely has, I could see, now that I look at him, now that I've zoomed in, I could see Anthony Albanese in Father Ted. When you pull a face like that, if you're going to start pulling faces like that, I'm afraid you are destined for one of two shows. You're either going to be in Father Ted or Only Fools and Horses with Dale and Rodney. I mean, how else could we assess a facial expression like that? Now, Kylie, folks, what did I say earlier? Please look at the thumbnail. I don't want this to be your lasting image of Kylie Minogue. Look, we are all going to age, folks. It's going to come to me. It's going to come to everyone. But, you know, whenever I talk about Kylie Minogue, this is not, I'm going to repeat myself, this is not the Kylie Minogue that I'm talking about. You know, the face looks like it's been manipulated. That's all I'm going to say. I don't think we're seeing an au naturel face right here. I'm getting cues of manipulation of tissue. And, you know, it just doesn't look right. It looks like someone who's desperately trying to give the impression that they're not aging, but it ain't working. And it gives you this bizarre sort of cognitive dissonance. It's like, yeah, this person looks like they're in their sort of early 60s, but they're trying to sell me on the notion that they're in their 40s. It's just not happening. So, you know, look, all the men who relate to Anthony Albanese's comments, they are not thinking of this Kylie Minogue. They are thinking of a different version of Kylie Minogue. Okay, now, let's zoom back out here. What does the title say? It says, Australian PM apologises for, quote, inappropriate comment. Inappropriate comments about Kylie Minogue. Inappropriate. We're going to have to assess this. Let's go on down. This is a short enough article, folks. Let me zoom in here. Make it easier to read. So this was from a few days ago, July the 6th. Now, it says the following. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has apologised unequivocally for comments he made about pop star Kylie Minogue in a podcast interview last week. The leader has made an appearance, or had made an appearance, on the Bush Deep podcast with comedian Nikki Osbourne. Nikki Osbourne, I couldn't remember her name. Who asked him during a 20-minute interview whether he would, quote, shag, marry or date Minogue. Actress Nicole Kidman or entertainer Rhonda Birchmore. I don't know who that is. After initially trying to avoid the question, political training, media training, I can guarantee you all of his advisors were thinking, please, Anthony, avoid this question. Please avoid it. And they would have been initially happy. So, after initially trying to avoid the question, Albanese said, oh, Kylie, clearly. Good man, Anthony. Relatable to the common man. This is more like it. Why can't we not get more of this from our politicians? Speaking to the common man. He was quickly met by a wave of condemnation, with one MP calling his remarks, quote, entirely inappropriate, and another adding that they were, quote, disrespectful to women and demean the office of Prime Minister. Who do you think, folks, before we go down this article, who do you think has made these comments? Do you think any men in government have made these comments? Do you think any males have risen up out of the crowd and said, this is disgusting and disgraceful, this demeans women? Or who do you think are making these comments? Okay. Osbourne, who is best known for posting crude comedy sketches on YouTube, had launched her podcast series earlier this year. Her podcast site describes her as a, quote, wildly inappropriate journalist who asks, quote, questions no one else would dare. In a one-line statement, I love this, folks. Let me just highlight this. This is great stuff. In a one-line statement issued early on Monday, the Prime Minister said, quote, I apologise unequivocally for the comments. I mean, folks, if Anthony Albanese is not going up in your estimation, I don't know what's wrong with you. Because not only does he come out with the comments, we're going to read exactly what he said down here, but despite all of the backlash, he literally gives 6 words of a response. Would we even call that a sentence? It's like a half sentence. 6 words. I apologise unequivocally for the comments. You gotta love it, folks. He didn't go on some big fucking, soppy splurge. The women, I didn't mean this, and No, he just said, I apologise unequivocally for the comments. Any man who reads that will understand exactly what Anthony means. What he means is, I'm happy with my comments. I'm not really apologising. I'm not really sorry for what I said. It's really what I think. I just let the public have a sneaky peek inside my mind. I don't apologise at all. But my advisors, Prime Minister, and all that. So I'll give you 6 words, just to acknowledge the fact that those who are whining then can't say that I haven't addressed the issue. I have addressed the issue. You see, I apologise unequivocally for the comments. Can't complain with that. Beautiful. Now, let's keep going. The remarks were made during an interview that took place in the Prime Minister's official residence in Canberra, and which was released at the end of last week. After Osbourne posed the question, Albanese, who married his partner, Jodie Hayden, in November, had initially responded, quote, I've just got married. I'm only 6 months in. Yes, Anthony, we understand that you've just got married. That's fine. Nobody has a problem with that. Loads of people get married to mingers. Loads of people get married to people that, it's more out of desperation, we could say. It just, once you get married, you get the social seal of approval. So loads of people get married. But that doesn't mean that they don't have little fantasies of their own. That doesn't mean they're actually happy. Does it? So, I understand, Anthony, you've just got married. But, you did give us a sneaky peek into your mind. We appreciate that. But after being pushed, the article continues, but after being pushed by Osbourne, he added, oh, Kylie, clearly. Now we're getting to the nuts and bolts, Anthony. I'm glad he didn't succumb. I'm glad he didn't succumb to his media training. This is great. And so Osbourne says you'd marry Kylie and shag her and date her, Osbourne said. And then here it is, folks. Here is the statement of the year. In my opinion, the greatest statement of the year from any politician. The most relatable statement. The statement that establishes most rapport with the common man. Albanese said, all of the above. She's terrific. All of the above, meaning he would not only marry and date Kylie, but he would shag her. Absolutely. Speaking to the common man. Anthony, we love it. Why can't we not have more of this? Now, this is where it gets hilarious. This is what really made me come on to the show this evening. Look at this. Look at this. Community Strong MP Zali Steggall said the remarks were, quote, entirely inappropriate, adding that he, quote, needs to learn to push back, lead by example, and call it out as sexist. Folks, let's indulge the moment. Let's have a look at Community Strong MP Zali Steggall. Let's see how much of a worldie she is. Let's put this up on the screen. Let's have a look. Let's get this gal up here. We're going to do this in real time. Let's see. Let me copy and paste all of this. Zali Steggall. Now, paste. Let's have a look. Let's get a look and see. Let's go on to Google Images. Oh, Lord Almighty, folks. Well, would you take a look at that? This is the face of the woman who says that the comments were, quote, entirely inappropriate, that they are sexist. Now, I mean, let's sort of zoom in here a little. Let's get a good close-up. Let's go for this one here. Let's see if we can get a good close-up of old Zali, if that's how you pronounce her name. Get a look at that, folks. Now, what do you notice? You know, use your eyes, folks. In the modern age, people want to be told what to think. You don't need to be told what to think, folks. You just need to use your senses. Now take a look at the lady in question. Zali Steggall. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Who cares? Now, how would you describe the physical attractiveness of this lady? Because I've just noticed a pattern in my life, folks. You see, the people who are most vocal about demeaning women, sexist comments, feminism is the way forward. You see all those people who spout some version of that. They all happen, in my opinion. Look, my eyes could be completely wonky. I could have wonky eyes. I could have distorted vision. So don't take my word for it. But you know, I wouldn't exactly call Zali here a worldie, would you? And the pattern that I have noticed throughout my life is that the people who harp on this narrative the most about sexism, feminism, and all this malarkey, they're all mingers. Pretty much. Every now and again you'll get an exception to the rule, but pretty much they're all mingers. They are all old, they're all flabby, usually overweight, and mingers. And you know, I'm looking at this individual, and again, just use your own eyes. Come to your own conclusions. I'm not going to tell you what to think. Now that you've got a look at the person in question, let's go back to our article. So, Community Strong MP Zali Steggall said the remarks were entirely inappropriate, adding that, quote, he needs to learn to push back. You can't have any fun if you're a politician, folks. No, as soon as any humour is brought into any discussion, you have to just down tools and become a robot. You must adhere to your media training, political training, you could say, and alienate yourself from the common man. That's what you need to do. You can't have a joke. You can't have fun. You need to be senior serious when you're a politician. Because there's nothing that endears you to the population than those characteristics and traits. So she thinks it's sexist. He needs to learn to push back. It's a terrible example to set. How is this sexist? You know, folks, think about this. What Anthony Albanese has basically done is he has complimented Kylie Minogue. It's a compliment. He's basically saying Kylie Minogue is sexually attractive. What woman doesn't want to be viewed as sexually attractive? What woman doesn't want to be called beautiful? What woman doesn't want a whole bunch of men vying for her attention? I mean, do we all not want to be the best versions of ourselves? Do we not all want to be appreciated for what it is that we bring to this world? You know, if Kylie Minogue is bringing physical attractiveness and some good music to the world, would we not want to praise the individual in person, you know, give them a compliment? You know, I'm sure Community Strong MP Zali Steggall wouldn't have had a problem if Anthony Albanese had praised her music. If he had complimented her music, she would have said, fantastic, woman empowerment. But as soon as he compliments her appearance, because that's all he's doing, he's just saying Kylie's hot. Back in the day, you know, very hot, you know, very sexually attractive. So sexually attractive that I would want to sleep with her and shag her. That's a compliment. What's wrong with that? How is that sexist? What's wrong with that? He's just acknowledging that she's a physical specimen. What chick doesn't want to be acknowledged for her external beauty? Why does everybody wear makeup? Why do all women wear makeup, pretty much? Why do they all, you know, spend a whole fuck ton of time? What outfit am I going to wear today? How am I going to do my hair? What's my skincare routine? When am I going to get my eyebrows done? How am I going to do my nails this week? Do men do any of this? No. Unless they're gay. But most men, heterosexual, straight dudes aren't going on like this. But women do. Why? Because they want to be as physically attractive as possible. And Anthony is broadcasting this undeniable compliment. He's just saying Kylie's physically attractive. Who doesn't want that? Sexist. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments section. But let's continue, because it gets better, folks. Because not only do we have community strong MP Sally Stegel, you've got to look at her. We also had Shadow Communications Minister Sarah Henderson. Shadow Communications. Well, we could make a joke about that. Shadow. Maybe that's the place to work if you're a bit of a minger. In the shadows. I'm not saying anyone's a minger. I'm just saying if you were a minger, you would want to work in the shadows. Why? Because when you're in the shade, when you're in the shadows, nobody can see you. They can just hear you. And so they have to cast their judgment based off what you say and how you say it. So look, Shadow Communications Minister Sarah Henderson said in a post on X, the comments were, quote, disrespectful to women, embarrassing to Australians, and demean the office of Prime Minister. So again, disrespectful to women. He is complimenting Kylie Minogue. I don't know how it's disrespectful to compliment someone's physical appearance by saying that you'd sleep with them. The fact that you would want to shag or sleep with them means you find them physically attractive. That's a compliment. Embarrassing to Australians. Speak for yourself. I don't think any dudes are embarrassed at all. I think they think it's hilarious. They'll not tell their wives that, but I think they think it's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. And there have to be more people out there that think like the Bandido. And she says this same garbage again of it demeans the office of the Prime Minister. What? So by the Prime Minister being more relatable to the common man, that demeans the office of the Prime Minister? That's not leading by example. So do you want politicians to establish rapport with the common folk or not? Let's get a look at Sarah. Sarah Henderson. Let's have a look here. I'm going to copy and paste all of this, because Sarah Henderson seems like a very common name. I want to make sure we get the right one. Let's get this into Google Images. Now, oh Lord, folks, here we go again. Dearie me, again, folks, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions. Let's find, where is this picture? I'm in this article. It has to be down here somewhere. Let's get rid of that. I need to find this picture. Where are you, Sarah? Don't hide from the Bandido. There she is. Let's zoom in. Let's get a good view of this. Now, there, folks, is Shadow Communications. Sarah Henderson. Again, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to present the evidence. Folks, this is evidence. It's an image. It's evidence. You're going to use your own eyes, and you're going to come to your own conclusion. Remember I said that I've noticed a pattern. It doesn't mean I'm right, because I could be making, I could be connecting dots where they ought not to be connected. So I could be wrong, completely and utterly. But I've noticed a pattern that anyone who criticizes men for saying things similar to what Anthony Albanese said, a joke, a bit of humour, a bit of the lads' locker room talk, it's relatable, it finds some common ground with the average citizen, the average man. Anytime I hear women complaining about these kinds of comments, saying they demean women and that they're sexist and that they're entirely inappropriate, the pattern that I've noticed in my life is that pretty much all of these women are mingers. That's what I've noticed. Now, we saw Sally there. Stegel. Sally Stegel. You got to look at her. Now you're getting a look at Sarah Henderson. Again, you're going to use your own eyes. You know the pattern that I've identified. Do any of these women look like Kylie Minogue? Do they sort of, if we were to get their younger versions, do you think they are at the same level of physical attractiveness as Kylie Minogue? Well, look, I know what my gut tells me, but I'm going to leave it up to you to form your own conclusions. Okay, now, let's move back here. Finish this article. So that's the Shadow Communications Minister, Sarah Henderson. She thinks it's disrespectful to women, embarrassing to Australians, and it demeans the office of Prime Minister. Okay. So, let us bring up our main screen. I think we could probably wrap it up there, I think. We don't need to read anymore. We get the gist of this. If you want to read the rest of the article, there are a few paragraphs left. If you want to read it, there's where you can find the article. BBC News, Australian PM apologises for inappropriate comments about Kylie Minogue. Okay, let's get the main screen back up. And let's extract a lesson from all this. Okay, so there's the backdrop. Let's get into this lesson, folks. I don't want this show to go on forever. We're going to try and wrap this up. Look, there are people in this life, folks, surprise, surprise, that have an agenda, something we talk about all the time. Now, here we are in the political world. So we've got Sarah Henderson, we've got Zali Steggall. I don't know anything about Australian politics, but I have three people from this article. We have Anthony Albanese, who's the PM. We have Zali Steggall. I can't even remember what she does. Senate or something. And then we've got Shadow Communications Minister, Sarah Henderson. These are the three people that I am dealing with in this article. Now, all of these people will have their own goals and ambitions. I don't know anything about Australian politics, but if I had to guess, Zali Steggall and fucking Sarah Henderson probably form part of some opposition to Anthony Albanese. That would be my guess. They form some part of the opposition. So again, it's not hard to see why they would leap on this opportunity. They're going to start swinging the feminism, sexist, inappropriate language card here. They're going to start throwing it around. Why? Well, it's fairly obvious. They're going to try and tarnish the reputation of Anthony Albanese. They're going to try and kick up a fuss here. Now, I don't really think it's worked. Nobody cares because the comments are extremely relatable. So nobody cares. Like the population, I cannot see the Australian people, unless you've got a few, of the batshit crazy feminist folk. They'll probably lose their shit. But most common people do not care about these comments. In fact, most men will find them hilarious. And they'll actually find Anthony Albanese's response, his 6-word response, they will find that equally as hilarious. Because he's showing signs that he really doesn't care. He's just going to do the necessary, bare minimum, apology sentence, apology phrase, and then just get on with it. Hilarious. I think it's great. So look, I would say these people probably, and I could be wrong, I could be spouting out of my arse, but if I had to guess, you're hardly going to get someone in Anthony Albanese's own party criticizing him in this way. These criticisms, these, attacks on Anthony Albanese are probably coming from competitors in the political domain. His competitors are leaping on this as an opportunity to discredit him, to damage his reputation, to lower his status. Okay, so that's reason number one why this is happening. Obviously, it's the perfect opportunity. Anthony's said something, he's made a joke, locker room banter, very relatable to the common person. And of course, you've got these aged women, let's just say. We've got these aged women telling us all about how sexist and inappropriate and demeaning the comments are. Right. So that's one reason why they're going to be doing this. This is a way to score some, it's a way to earn some easy political capital, you could say. When you damage someone else's reputation and you're seen as, this virtuous person who's standing up for women's rights and, women empowerment and feminism, you're basically trying to use his comments to bolster your own credibility because you're signaling to the population, I stand up for women, I'm a feminist, this is demeaning, women empowerment. Okay, so they're trying to simultaneously discredit Anthony Albanese while also propping themselves up under the banner of fucking feminism and women empowerment. Okay, that's clear, I would argue. I'd say that's fairly evident. What's the other thing I want to talk about here? Why these women are coming out with this? Well, here's my theory. And remember, the Bandido has lots of theories about life. Doesn't mean they're right. It's just a theory that I'm going to pluck out of my arse right now and present to you on the show. Here's my theory. It relates back to what I said when we were analysing the article. In my experience, I have noticed a pattern. And the pattern that I have noticed is that ugly, overweight, flabby, wrinkly mingers are the type of people who tend to criticise men who come out with comments like this. And these people overwhelmingly are females. So they are flabby, wrinkly, fat, ugly, aged women. That tends to be, that's just my experience. That's the pattern that I have recognized. That the most vocal people in this space, the most vocal feminists, the most vocal people who are always advocating for women empowerment, most of them are mingers. Now, there's another thing here. This is my theory, plucked clean out of my arse. These women that we've just seen, we've heard what they've said according to the BBC, and we've got a look at them. I just picked a few random images on Google so we could get a look. Because we've seen Anthony's face, we've seen Kylie's face, we know them. It's only fair, folks. We need to run the experiment fairly. If we're going to get a look at Anthony, we did that at the start. We zoomed in on Anthony. We zoomed in on Kylie. You can see young Kylie in the thumbnail. It's only fair that we zoom in on the other two as well, because they're being very publicly vocal in their opposition to Anthony's comments. So, here's my theory. I think that the vast majority of women who are splurging, who are spouting these values of feminism and the importance of women empowerment, because they are mingers, I think their adoption of this worldview comes from a place of envy. That's my theory. Now, what is envy, folks? What is an envious person? An envious person is someone who laments the fact, who is bitter about the fact that someone else has something that they don't have. That's what an envious person is. They look at other people and they are bitter about the fact that these other people have things that they don't have. And instead of looking at their own lives and saying, fuck, I'd love to look like that. Fuck, I'd love to have those things. I'm going to work really hard to try and become the best version of myself and to try and get as close, to move myself as close to circumstances that they are in by giving my best in life. Instead of doing that, these envious people simply throw out negative, bitter statements into the universe. And why do they do this? They do this because they want to drag everyone who is a potential competitor of theirs down to their level. That's what they want. They want to drag the masses down to their level so that they don't stick out as the old, wrinkly, flabby, fat, ugly messes that they are. Because, you know, if everybody else in society is looking great, but they aren't, well, then they stick out. But if everybody else kind of looks like them, then they blend into the masses. They don't stick out. Most people are at their level. Here's my theory, folks. I don't think it's an accident that these women who are complaining about Anthony Albanese's comments, I don't think it is a coincidence that they're saying what they're saying because of who Anthony Albanese is talking about. Who's he talking about? That's right. Kylie Minogue, pop superstar, worldie, a hottie back in the day. An easy 8 out of 10. Like Kylie Minogue, back in her heyday, an easy 8 out of 10 in terms of physical attractiveness. Perhaps more. Maybe an 8.5, maybe she's, I don't know. It depends on, there's a little bit of subjectivity in there. Maybe some people will see her as an 8.5. Some people might see her as a 9. But I think we can all agree, she's at least an 8. You know, in her heyday, Kylie Minogue is at least an 8. That will be the bottom. She's not going to fall through that bottom floor of an 8 out of 10. So, you know, here we have Kylie Minogue, world-renowned, high-status, singer, pop star, loads of influence, loads of people admire her, admire how she looks, admire her music. She has lots of fans, lots of influence. And then we have 2 aged ladies who work in the government. Let me have a drink of water as you stew on that. Two old, aged ladies who work in the government. Surprise, surprise. They aren't happy about the fact that Anthony Albanese wants to shag Kylie Minogue and not shag them. Anybody else on board with the Bandido's theory? It's just a theory. You know, how cool is it? You know, if you're a chick, if you're a woman, imagine you have a whole bunch of dudes the world over coming out with something like Anthony Albanese, saying that they'd love to, you know, they'd love to get together with you, get intimate with you. Like imagine you had so many options in the dating marketplace. You just have men who are hell-bent on getting into your pants. You know, the ultimate signal of just how physically attractive you must be. Imagine that. And you know, you think of Kylie Minogue, especially in her prime, pop superstar, loads of fans, loads of influence, charismatic, great performer, you could say. Many people would say a great performer, an iconic, one of the iconic names of pop culture over the last, you know, pop music culture over the last 20, 30 years. Iconic the world over. Physically attractive. Loads of dudes want to shag and bang her. And then we have 2 aged ladies in the Australian government. One of them is the Shadow Communications Minister, and the other works in the Senate. Please tell me, folks, what dude would want to shag anyone who carries with them qualifications like that? if we had to, do a comparison between Kylie and, old Zali Steggall and Sarah Henderson. Is that what she was called? Henderson? Folks, my theory is that I think Anthony has hit a soft spot. Sorry, let me rephrase that. A sore spot, which happens to be very soft. I think Anthony, with his comments, has sort of brought it all back to reality for Sarah and Zali. They probably look at themselves in the mirror and say, I work in the Australian government. People hate politicians. Nobody likes me. Nobody thinks I'm an admirable person. Nobody values my work. And I'm an aged lady. Does anybody want to shag me? Does anybody care what I do? Anybody care how I look? I mean, that's just my theory. I feel as though these comments coming from the two ladies in question, the two aged women in question, my theory is that, yes, the comments are, there's no doubt that a significant motivation behind these comments is to score political points. That's true. I ain't denying that. Perhaps that's the overwhelming reason why these comments have been made. But indulge my theory, folks, just for a few minutes. I'm going to argue that these comments have been made not exclusively from the point of view of scoring political points. I think there's a bit of envy mixed in to those comments. Envy towards who? Well, I think these aged women have probably done, a very quick reflection of their life. And they're thinking to themselves, Kylie Minogue, world-renowned pop star, super attractive in her heyday, loads of fans, a pop star icon, has all this music, appears on all of these talent shows, does all of these live performances, adored the world over by many fans. Super attractive. And here I am, working in the Australian government. Most of the population do not like politicians. Most of the population do not like the people who work in government. And I think that there's a bit of envy in these comments. It's almost as if the two aged ladies in question are kind of saying, what a horrendous thing to say, objectifying women, treating them like some sort of a sexual object that can be just, shagged on demand. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I would expect to come from the mouth of someone who doesn't get shagged very much. That's just my experience of the world. Whenever I look and listen to enough people who come out with comments like this, and they're very ferocious. These people, they really want to drive home the message that comments like Anthony Albanese's, are just sexist and inappropriate and demeaning of women. Yeah, that's the kind of comment that I would expect to come from a minger. A minger who hasn't been shagged in fuck knows how long. And because they haven't been shagged in fuck knows how long, they don't want any other people to be getting shagged. They don't want any other people to be, adored and admired for their physical attractiveness. Because that sort of shines a light on them. In other words, Kylie Minogue has something that our two aged ladies who work in the Australian government, who are calling Anthony Albanese's comments inappropriate, Kylie Minogue has something that they don't have. And I feel, there's a bit of envy in there. There's a bit of, yeah, fucking Kylie Minogue, pop star, superstar, super attractive, fans all over the world, adore her for what she does, her music, her battles against cancer, all this sort of stuff. And here I am, an aged woman in the Australian government, carrying out a role that nobody admires. That's my theory, folks. I think these women in the Australian government, Zali and fucking Sarah, I feel like there's a bit of bitterness in these comments. I think they're looking at Anthony Albanese and they are furious at the fact that Anthony would love to shag Kylie, but that nobody really wants to shag them. They aren't getting any offers on the scale that Kylie Minogue gets these offers. Do people go on to podcasts and say, oh yeah, would you like to shag, marry and date Sarah Henderson, the shadow communications minister in the Australian government? How many times do you think that question has been asked on a podcast? Oh, would you like to date, marry and shag the Senate member of the Australian government, Zali Steggall? Do you think those are the kinds of questions that get asked by podcast hosts the world over whenever there are dudes on the podcast? And that's where I think there's a bit of envy here, folks. And folks, remember, what's the lesson here? What's the lesson? Envious people are bitter people. Envious people want to do nothing other than bitch, moan, whine, complain. The last thing they want to do is actually look inwards and take action in their own life. All they want to do is to try and convince other people through words and through manipulation that, this is disgusting and inappropriate, what has been said. They want to just try and get people not to use their own eyes, not to use their own logic. They want to try and infiltrate people's minds and have people see the world the way they see it. And effectively, what are they trying to do? Well, I go back to what I said earlier. They want to drag everyone down to their level. If Zali Steggall and Sarah Henderson could have it their way in this world, let's say they had the special ability to manipulate people's appearance, they would probably make all of their competitors mingers. They'd turn all of their competitors ugly. Why? Because by turning all of their competitors physically ugly, they now stand out as the most attractive option in the marketplace. But you see, they can't do that. And Kylie Minogue wipes the floor with them. And there will be a whole bunch of dudes who would want to bang Kylie Minogue and not bang them. And I feel like they look at Anthony Albanese's comments not just from the perspective of scoring political points, damaging Anthony's reputation and enhancing their own, by virtue signalling this whole idea of feminism and women empowerment. That is present in the comments, but I also think there's a degree of envy. Kylie has something that they don't have and never will have, which is sex appeal. Fuck me, I put the images up on screen. We can all get a look at Kylie Minogue, Zali Steggall, and fucking Sarah Henderson. We can all compare them. And call me distorted, call my vision wonky. But whenever I look at all three women in question, Kylie Minogue clearly has something that the other two don't, which is raw physical sexual attractiveness. In other words, these women aren't going to be the subject of men's, adoration and approaches. Absolutely not. They're just going to work away in the shadows in the government, far away from where anyone can see them. And this is the thing, folks. Envious people, as soon as I detect a whiff of envy in someone, if I get a whiff that someone's envious, if they carry that sort of trait with them, and it's easy to spot, folks. One of the red flags of an envious person is constant moaning, bitching, whining, and complaining. That's all you have to look out for. If you're sort of in someone's company and all they ever fucking do is moan and complain about how bad the world is, about how bad this person is, about how arrogant this person is, about how shit this person is at this, about how bad it is, the things that this other person has said. If you are around people who do nothing other than moan, complain, bitch and whine, that is normally a good indicator that you're dealing with an envious person. And if you're dealing with an envious person, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with someone who's bitter. And when you're dealing with someone who's bitter, they don't want to take any self-accountability. They don't want to take any action to try and improve their own physical attractiveness, their own set of circumstances in life. No, they just want to bitch and complain, gossip, spread, altered, manipulated information, manipulated ideas about how the world works in order to convince people to see the world their way and to try and drag the rest of the world down to their level and then below their level. That's what envious people want. They want to use their bitching, whining, complaining rhetoric to try, effectively, and dissuade other people from doing things. How many times have we seen it, folks? Someone's doing something great in life, and you'll get a few envious, bitter people who will say hateful things about these people. And then the person in question who's actually doing something worthwhile and good with their life, they get very badly affected by the negative commentary on their life. And what do they end up doing? They stop doing the worthwhile, productive thing because some fat, ugly, wrinkly, flabby minger has made some fucking comment voicing their disapproval of what it is that they're doing. Folks, envious people can be identified by just analysing the degree to which they complain. You see, if I'm around people, folks, see if I'm around someone and I start to hear them complaining, I am creating as much fucking distance as possible, as soon as possible. I don't want to be around envious people. And these women, the fact that they have publicly came out and made the comments, you were able to read the comments in the article. The fact that they've come out and made these comments, I smell bitter, envious people. Bitter, envious old women who haven't been shagged in fuck knows how long. And they're bitter about the fact that no men want to bang them. And they are bitter about the fact that nobody's talking about them on podcasts in that way. And so what do? They try to dissuade other people from, viewing women as sexually attractive. That's what they're doing. They're trying to give us this notion that, oh no, men shouldn't make comments like that. Men shouldn't say things like they want to, they're effectively complimenting women. The fact that they want to sleep with them, date them, or marry them is a fucking compliment. That's the man signalling in his slightly comedic, blunt way that he finds the chick physically attractive. These old women would try to convince you that that kind of rhetoric is inappropriate. Oh, I wonder why. I wonder what their hidden agenda would be. Why would they not want other women to be subjected to the adoration and approaches of other men? I wonder why. Because they're going to take all the men that these other women would secretly want, but they can't have, because they're mingers. And so what do? They try to drag everybody down to their level, and ideally down below their level. So look, envy, folks, run a fucking mile from it. That's what I do. I run a mile. How do you spot envious people? Just listen. Listen to how frequently they complain. I never complain to people. You'll never hear me complaining, ever. I won't start saying, oh, for fuck's sake, such and such did this today and they shouldn't have done that, and they're a prick, and, it's just so unfair life, and, you'll never hear me coming out with this crap. And I don't be around people who come out with that crap either, because that is them broadcasting that they are bitter, envious people. And I know what bitter, envious people are like. They normally don't have your best interests at heart. As soon as you start to do something good in life, you see while you play at their level, you see while you're down while you're down in the muck and shit with them, oh, they'll be your best friend, no problem. No problem. You see the bitter, envious people, as long as you play at their level, oh, they'll have you as a best friend, no problem. You see, as soon as you start to excel at life, see, as soon as you start to get your physical conditioning in order and you start to look better, as soon as you start to do really productive, worthwhile things in life, you see these people, they'll tell you one thing to your face and then they'll be all fucking bitching and whining behind your back before you know it. They're only happy to be your friend as long as you're playing at their level. Because see, whenever you're down in the muck and shit at their level, you aren't a competitor to them. You aren't shining a big spotlight on them. You're not making them look bad. Because when everyone's covered in muck and shit, everyone looks the same. Everyone smells the same. As soon as you start to rise out of the muck and shit and you clean yourself up and you start to smell a bit better and you get all the shit off your clothes, well, all of a sudden now you stand out from the people who are down in the muck and shit. And all of a sudden the rest of the world starts to say, you actually look well and you don't smell a shit. I want to do business with you. I want to have a friendship with you. I want to have a romance with you. And you see the people who are down in the muck and shit, they get out competed. Nobody cares about them. And because you start to do well in life, you shine a big spotlight onto them. And everybody kind of looks at them and says, fucking hell. You see those people down in the muck and shit? Look at the state of them. Envious, bitter people do not want that to happen. And that is why they will go behind your back and they will badmouth you. They will bitch and complain about you without you knowing. That's why you want to distance yourself from them. And these women, I don't even know who these women are. Zali Stegal and fucking Sarah Henderson. The fact that they have came out publicly and said what they have said, I ain't going to be associating with people like that. Because that's giving me clear evidence. Call me distorted. It's giving me clear evidence that these women are bitter and envious. It goes without saying, folks, there is nothing wrong with Anthony Albanese's comments. Obviously, it's a joke. It's humor. He's on a podcast. There's a female podcast host asking the question. It's not even a male podcast host. It's a female podcast host. She doesn't have a problem with asking the question. She doesn't have a problem with the answer that he gave. Nobody in the population, unless you're a batshit crazy feminist, has a problem with what Anthony Albanese has said. Most men will find it hilarious and think it's great and find it actually relatable, oddly enough, what he said. But yet here we have these two old-aged women trying to tell us that there's something wrong with these comments. And then we have to analyse why they are trying to shove that narrative down our throats. Yes, they are trying to score political brownie points. They are being opportunistic. That is true. I'm not denying that. But for me, in my experience, folks, it's Bandido Talks. You're here to listen to what the Bandido has to say. You're here to listen to the Bandido's experience. In my experience, people who come out with comments like that publicly, they are normally, more often than not, envious, bitter people. And envious, bitter people will only be your friend for as long as you play at their level down in the mud and shit. As soon as you start to excel at life, as soon as you start to outshine them and outcompete them and start to acquire more attention and more acclaim from the world, they will no longer be your friend and they will actually go a step further. They won't even be upfront about it. They will give you the illusion that they are your friend and then they will go behind your back like envious, bitter people do. And they will tell a different story behind your back, trying to chisel away your reputation, chisel away your credibility, chisel away your status so that they can draw you back down to the mud and shit where they will spend the rest of their lives. Okay, that is our show, folks. Anthony Albanese, that's my defense of Anthony Albanese. No problem. I'm all for Anthony's comments. I'm glad that he didn't go into this big soppy apology. He gave 6 words. It looks like he didn't even care. Good on him. That's the kind of political speak that we're after. So anyway, folks, again, have we got any live chats? No live chats. But you can get down into the comments section. Let me know your thoughts and insights down there. Do you think these comments from Anthony Albanese are entirely inappropriate? Are they very sexist? Are they demeaning to women? Are they not, appropriate for a man of his stature and position in the world? Is it inappropriate to be relatable to the common person? Let me know down in the comments what you think. Feel free to give the show a thumbs up. Give it a like, folks, if you like what you're hearing. And then finally, folks, feel free to follow Bandido Talks here on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, subscribe. I should say. I'm saying follow. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what we're doing. We are live here every week. We're live here every week here on YouTube. We're also, folks, live over on Rumble. The scrolling black banner below, you'll see it's heading off screen here. It'll come back around again. Head over to Rumble. We're also posting content, posting live shows, completely different live shows over on Rumble. Use that scrolling black banner to head over to Rumble. We've got like over 40 live shows, completely different live shows over on Rumble. Subscribe over on Rumble, Bandido Talks. Subscribe here on YouTube. Again, you can, where is it? It's here. I always get mixed up on the scrolling black banner. You can follow over on X is what I'm trying to say. There it is. X, Bandido Talks. Follow over there. We can notify you of any upcoming live shows when we decide to have them. And then finally, folks, up above on the scrolling red banner, you will see the email for the Bandido, matteo@inspirit.uk. If you're listening to the show, folks, and you like the Bandido's point of view, if you like the way he analyzes topics, news stories, world events, people, and you'd like to get in touch with the Bandido, if you'd like to give the Bandido a piece of your mind, if you'd like to explain a certain circumstance in your life to the Bandido, and you need an impartial third party to analyze it and see if we can conjure up a solution, that's the email that you're going to have to use to contact the Bandido. That's where you'll find me. matteo@inspirit.uk. Folks, that is everything from me. It's toasty in here. I need to go outside and get some fresh air. And some apple juice. I'm going to have some apple juice too. Friday evening, folks. What would Friday evening be without some apple juice? That's everything from me. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks. Enjoy your incoming weekend, I should say. The rest of your Friday. And with all of that said, folks, it is over and out. This week, live on YouTube from the Bandido.